Greetings, it's Hugh Ballou and Russell Dennis on this version of the Nonprofit Exchange. And got a dear friend, a longtime friend who's been doing amazing work. And today I'm traveling in an airport with some noise, so I'm going to be in the background and mute my mic. So Russell, why don't you take it over and be the primary interviewer and invite Chuck to share with us, would you please?
Greetings. Thank you, Hugh. As always, welcome everyone to the Nonprofit Exchange, your weekly podcast that brings you nonprofit leaders, thought leaders from around the world to talk about how to make your nonprofit better. Today, we're privileged to have Chuck Vollmer, who is the creator of Jobemonics. Now, I know you hear a lot of information on the news about the economy and about the job market. But what you won't hear are the types of things that Chuck is talking about here. Mr. Vollmer, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Russell.
You know, I've got a nice long bio, but it always works better because they never do justice to the people that we see here. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I define myself as three things, triple oxymoron, if you will. Number one, I'm a dedicated Christian. Number two is I'm a serial entrepreneur. And number three, I'm a hardened combat fighter pilot. So, Jobemonics started about 10 years ago, and it's somewhere between a ministry and a mission. We focus on small business creation and jobs creation at the base of the social economic pyramid, and our specialties are working with minorities, women, Generation Z, which we call screenagers, the kids that spend all their time on the screen, and veterans, because we think those are the demographics that are most in need. And so we have quite a library, about 9 different books that I've written, and we have about 18 city initiatives that really revolves around community development and urban renewal.
Chuck, what was the big driving motivation behind Jobemonics? What was it that really hit you at the core that said, you know what, I don't like what I see, something different has to happen, and I need to do it? What was that, and what that drove you there?
Well, as I started off, it was started in prayer. I don't want to over spiritualize things. Being a fighter pilot, I'm tending to be kind of an anti-establishment guy, so it's unusual for me to have gotten into it. But I was on one of the presidential campaigns back in 2007, and I was led to write a book about economic security. The presidential campaign that I was on, that an advisory group, it was a national security, and since I was an ex-fighter pilot and the corporate executives at General Dynamics, I had a lot of experience on airplanes and tanks and weapons and that stuff. And I also spent about 10 years in the Middle East, so I had a pretty good handle on what was happening after 9/11. But the serial entrepreneur part of it, I was actually in New York City briefing a bunch of Wall Street executives, and they said, why don't you write a book? So I said, no, I really don't think so. So I prayed about it, and unfortunately, when you pray about things, sometimes you get an answer. In this case, I did get an answer, and he said, yeah, go ahead and do it. So I wrote the first book out of 9, and figured I could just go to Capitol Hill, which I did about 20 times. Actually, Hugh went with me in a couple of meetings on Capitol Hill, and I thought that they would just love, my intellectual capability. And both the Democrats and the Republicans kind of showed me the door. They were not interested in a centrist approach to small business and job creation at the base of the pyramid, the social economic pyramid. So we essentially went to the governors and got a little bit more interest, but the real interest came from the mayors and the community leaders in the inner cities. And they just kind of fed up, that nothing's working for them. And so our unconventional approach to small business creation and micro business creation has appealed to a lot of the community leaders in the inner cities. And again, we've got about 18 different activities going in different cities. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to your short question. So let me stop there.
Oh, that's amazing, Chuck. You know, I remember Henry Kissinger saying that the absence of alternatives clears the mind marvelously. And I think that may have been where some of those local leaders, you're working in some communities that have been hit pretty hard. And so you went to them with this quite a while ago, but there seems to be a little bit of resistance to it. Why do you think that there's so much resistance to these ideas that can really create impactful change that no one's talking about?
Well, you know, if you consider white a color, you know, a lot of places I go, I'm the only guy of color in the meeting. So, so there's a resistance about somebody that presents himself as a middle-aged white rich guy, you know, kind of Trump-esque, you know, when you go in the inner city. So there's an immediate kind of like, why are you here? And so once I start meeting with them and start laying out our concept about a community-based business generator, how to mass produce business, you see, if I produce one net new job in the rich burbs, you know, I've created one job. But if I go in the inner city, in the depressed inner cities, and create one net new job, I not only create a job, but I also reduce the poverty rate, and I also take a big step to reducing the crime and providing hope. So I get a triple impact in the inner city. And you know, like I said, the inner city guys are very open to a self-empowerment strategy, okay, and how they could, because but then once that happens, you have to get a coalition together. And so we work on these coalitions, and then the coalitions in the inner cities, they come up against other coalitions, and the other coalitions in the inner city are very established, you know, that whether they're looking for, well, it's just, there's a lot of competition for the few resources in the inner city. What I think differentiates us is the fact is we have some turnkey programs that could make our programs self-financing. For example, in Baltimore, we went to West Baltimore, and there was a number of community leaders that took me all through West Baltimore. And, you know, West Baltimore is probably one of the hardest hit areas in the country. And so the coalition, but they came up against other competing ideas of how to do it. But again, we're not distraught at all about you know, the difficulty that we had to get the thing started, because we changed the dialogue. We take a dialogue to self-empowerment, how to mass produce, how to create initiatives. Baltimore, for example, we wanted to create 100,000 new jobs in the inner city. I just got back from Chicago, and the two worst hit neighborhoods in Chicago are Austin and Englewood. And I went into Austin and a bunch of community leaders, and I've probably got 50 community leaders now working with me now to, I'm supporting them, let's put it that way, about how to create thousands of jobs in, you know, hundreds of micro businesses in one of the hardest hit neighborhoods, and working with their aldermen and their city councilmen and the mayor and the governor. And there's a lot of money in both Baltimore and in places in Chicago. We're working in Atlanta, in Detroit, those types of places that are interested in created minority-owned businesses. And to me, that's the only way that the problems in the inner cities are going to solve, is mass-produce, highly scalable micro businesses, and focusing on the skill levels that are low skill levels. So that's kind of what we're doing, and it's a process, not an event. And I'm very pleased the way the things are going right now in the inner cities, because because there's a lot of excitement about it, and there's a lot of debate, and there's a lot of buy-in that needs to go on. What I need is a guy like you, Baloo, who is the maestro, to come in with me now and to orchestrate the cacophony that I seem to be able to create.
Yeah, this is a lot of what you're doing. Not only creates businesses for people, which is sustainable, but you take other things into consideration like the environment. So the things that you're doing are serving the community in its entirety. And those are some of your larger projects. Talk a little bit about how the sustaining and cleaning up the environment in these areas plays into bringing about a recovery for them.
Yeah, when jobs don't create jobs, businesses do. Small businesses today create about 80% of all new businesses in this last decade, which is amazing with the austere environment, because everybody in Washington really wants to cater to the big business. It's kind of whether it's a Democrat or Republican, they tend to look for the big business. And the big business really haven't created all that many new jobs. And with the new tax cuts and everything that are going on, businesses are going to use that to make money on money. They're going to buy back stock and, invest in the secondary market and those type of things. Where small businesses, they get a little extra money, they hire, and they tend to hire the unemployed. So the whole notion of minority-owned businesses, is the kind of way to change the paradigm on the inner city. So now you mentioned energy. We have really kind of three areas. Jobs still create jobs, businesses do, but businesses really focus on satisfying a current need. There's really kind of three broad categories. Number one category is filling the 6 million open jobs today. And those 6 million open jobs, and we know where they are. We do a quarterly report that is about 300 pages on where the jobs are and what jobs are needed and where the skill levels are needed. So matching those to a skills-based training program that we have, and we have access to about 9,000 skills-based training programs, which are all federally certified. So that's number one area. The second area is on the digital economy. And the emerging digital economy will create tens of millions of jobs. And that's really where we focus on the net savvy, digital age, screen ager types of people. But the third big area is the energy. And we have programs like solar panel installation and maintenance. We have construction and demolition, environmental remediation. We have weatherization and programs. So we have a number of programs that are involved with energy efficiency that not only creates green jobs, and by the way, the digital economy is green jobs. So, those are all green related kind of jobs. So we focus on those three broad areas for jobs, is filling the existing jobs and the new jobs that are coming available through the energy technology revolution and the digital technology revolution. And we've written a book on all three of those areas. So what we do is try to tailor it to the inner cities, and we provide all that information and show them that when you go to the decision makers and the policy makers, that there's some research and logic behind this to get these started.
Well, the research in the Jobemonics report, even just the quarterly reports, is phenomenal. And there's stuff that, there's common myths, and the way that they count unemployment really doesn't account for the majority of the people that are actually out there. Talk a little bit about some of these quarterly reports that you do, because I've not seen anything like them anywhere. And if somebody really wants to get a good handle on what's happening, they'll want to read these reports. And so how much are people in leadership positions in Washington reading these reports? Are they resisting them? What sort of responses and feedback do you get from these reports because they're brilliant.
Well, again, thank you. First of all, for the people who listen to this podcast, you can go to Jobemonics.com. That's J-O-B, job, enomics.com. And go to the presentation tab, and you can download these reports for free. And we have 30,000 people that download these every month. And so that's quite a few. As far as the policymakers and decision makers, we tend to focus more on the community leaders, those decision leaders. And we get it to them and we expose them to this information. And then they ask us to work with them to develop a plan for specifically for their neighborhoods. The two reports you talk is our comprehensive employment and our comprehensive unemployment. The first one's about 175 pages long, and it's updated every quarter. And the unemployment is about 150 pages, updated quarterly. The employment kind of shows where the jobs are in the fastest growing industries and what we just talked about. The unemployment is equally important because it looks at why people are leaving the workforce at twice the rate that they are entering the workforce. And in the inner cities, if you look at it, and the first thing we go and we draw a map by each neighborhood or every census tract, and we look at the household income. And usually, for example, in Erie, Pennsylvania, in the heart of the inner city, and it's a city about 100,000 people, the inner city is their household income is only about $11,000. Or about a mile away, the average house. Hope in the American dream is that they tend to turn to welfare, or they tend to work to the underground economy for a living. So that's why the reported household income. So you got to deal with the issues of why are people not joining the traditional work environment, and we tailor our programs to do that. Now, in the inner cities, especially in the low skilled areas, that doesn't mean, a plumber makes more than a PhD now. So, if you could, if we can, and the people in the inner cities, if they don't have a lot of hope in the traditional economy, they're more likely to turn to the underground economy, the illegal economy, than try to traditional business. And a lot of people ask me, they say, well, in the inner city, well, these people are not motivated. And I said, well, that's not true. I said, first of all, if you go to a job fair in the inner city, I was one in Camden, New Jersey, about 2 years ago, and because I was helping sponsor it, there was probably 5,000 people in the line, but to get the 50 jobs that are there, it was like winning the lotto. And I said, well, this is kind of a backward way of doing it, but if I could teach these guys, certify a skill and certify them within weeks or a month, that is a lot higher probability. And so they just don't know that this is available because we're always talking about get a college education. Well, that's a bridge too far for 90% of people that are financially distressed. And so, but we say our program is if I can certify somebody in a skill within months and a career within a year, then that's a different prospect. And especially if it ends up with a minority-owned business that is anchored in the inner city. Unfortunately, the people in the inner city that are successful, the first thing they do is they move out.
Yeah. So and you're looking at communities that are hardest hit, and I know they're open to that. And no two communities are exactly the same, although you have the same types of problems. Talk a little bit about the variety of some of these projects and which ones fit better in some parts of the country than they do in others.
Yeah, well, let's take West Baltimore versus Erie, Pennsylvania, and versus Phoenix, Arizona. Our Baltimore effort was focused on creating about 100,000 jobs in the inner cities. So that's about how much they've lost over the last decade or two. So we're talking about within the next 5 to 8 years to create that number of jobs. So it's a doable thing. So in Baltimore, there's 6 medical centers in Baltimore. You got Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland and stuff. So one of our initiative is a direct care initiative. And a direct care tends to be focused on older, particularly women, that their basic skill is a maternal skill. Okay. And so direct care can mean child care, elder care, and behavioral care. And behavioral care is a really big one. And 40% of all the new jobs that are going to be out in the next decade are going to be in direct care. For example, behavioral care, if I could teach somebody to start an in-home business or an at-home business, provide in-home care. And behavioral care has got to do with smoking cessation, obesity, sickle cell anemia, diabetes, weight loss. And if I can create them with a program that they could go in and do counseling services for these people, but also be equipped with a pad or a PDA or a smartphone that's connected to a Nova Health or to these medical centers and stuff like that. So they go in and they have a prescribed kind of program to work with, like a weight loss program. Okay. And if they need additional help, that the person has got diabetes because of their overweight and that type of thing, they can connect to a doctor or a physician's assistant right there and take care of the problem immediately. So that's kind of a direct care one. Another one was that Baltimore has got 30,000 derelict homes. And it's really, and so the city is, what they're trying to do is just kind of plow them down and make green space, make parks out of them. And I said, well, that's kind of a dumb way of doing it. So I went to an investment group and they said, if you can get the city of Baltimore that owns these 30,000 derelict homes and use that as collateral, we could put together a $100 million micro business loan to start businesses, and we could do manual deconstruction rather than hiring some outside firm to come in with bulldozers and knock everything down and clear it out. But we could take the things down, and I could certify a guy to swing a hammer within weeks. Now that sounds facetious, but it isn't. I'm talking about OSHA. And in about 3 or 4 weeks, I can certify them how to do a jackhammer, and I can certify them in a couple of weeks to do a Caterpillar, or a Bobcat kind of tractor type of thing. And so we take these down, and I can use the aggregates for road fill and work they're doing in the harbor. I could take the electronics or the wiring, the HVA systems to reclaim that through a program we call E-Cycling USA that we started that can retrieve the raw materials. I can create renovation businesses, because not all these houses need to come down. Some of them just need to be upgraded. And you upgrade them either through weatherization or solar panels or, those type of things. So there's a whole kind of a manufacturing deconstruction. And then in Baltimore, we had several. We've got a digital economy one, and then we also had a collaboration with Under Armour that was going to invest $139 million in community development, but they were going to make parks. And because they were Under Armour was building a big $26 billion R&D, and the inner city guys fought against them. And the reason they fought it was the NAACP and the ACLU. And the reason they fought against them was because they were only going to give 5% of the direct workforce to the inner city people. And so I said to the NAACP and the ACLU, the community, I said, why are you even bothering for 5% or 30%? I said, if you go after the indirect workforce, which it means, the shopkeepers, the entertainment, the lodging, and the transportation guys that support that, that's 5 times as many jobs. So use that $139 million to create the service industries to support the direct care guys. So that kind of gives you an example in Baltimore. And in Phoenix, it's totally different. The guy that's leading our Phoenix effort is a 2-time ex-con. And Phoenix has become a gateway city for the drug cartels. And since the border security is up now, and the drug cartels are getting a lot smarter, they're saying, well, why try to get our guys across the border? Why don't we just recruit at-risk youth, gang members, and the ex-cons to do our bidding for us in the inner cities? So we say as an alternative to that, it's like fighting fire with fire. You start brush fires to stop a forest fire. We say, why don't we create a workforce reentry center to mass produce micro businesses that are really tailored for the ex-offender and the at-risk and the gang member community. And so that seemed to have gotten a lot of interest. The first, when you go in there and start proposing these things, and these are pretty detailed plans we lay out, they laugh, they say, what kind of nutcase are you doing this? But then as they start to socialize it, then they say, hey, look, maybe it's not a bad idea. Then when they take it over and they own it, they change it around to really fit it the way they want to do it. So those are 2 examples. I can go on and on and on, but that gives you a few examples of the type of things that we're trying to do.
And that's remarkable. And it is important because everybody has something that's a little bit different going on, and they have different motivations. But the beauty of this and the power in it is not only in Baltimore, for example, have you taken care of a problem with housing, you've created careers for people that pay good wages and present more home ownership opportunities, actually repurposing the community and turning it around. What sort of response in your travels, because now this is really starting to take hold, what sort of responses have you got from potential corporate partners? Have you found some that have been really receptive? Have you met some resistance? What's been the overall experience that you've had?
Well, not only the corporate, but for the high net worth individuals. The one we have in Erie, it seems to work out. We've had a little bit more success in majority-minority cities as opposed to minority-majority cities. And the reason, it goes to the heart of what you just said, is like I said, in Erie, Pennsylvania, within 1 mile, the household income's 8 times what it is. So I go into high income areas, whether it's the high net worth individuals or the corporations, and they say, well, why should I be interested in this? And they said, because it's some kind of spiritual thing. I said, no. I said, some kind of moral thing. No. I said, the reason you want to do this is protect your gains. And I said, if you don't fix the problems in the inner city, then it's going to drag you down. It's a difference between a bucket of crabs and a bucket of ants. The difference between a bucket of crabs and a bucket of ants?
Well, the ants travel faster.
Yeah, well, the ants will pull all the ants out of the bucket, and the crabs will keep pulling all the other crabs down in the bucket. So what we want to do is create a rising tide that lifts all boats, or a bucket of ants where everybody's helping each other out instead of dragging each other down.
Okay.
In Erie, Pennsylvania, they've probably spent $500 million on modernizing the waterfront. And I said, well, how are you going to get people to come in there when you've got, abject poverty, within walking distance? And I said, you could buy a lot more cops and keep all the homeless guys, corralled in the poverty areas, or you can eliminate the poverty. And I said, we've got a number of programs. We have, for example, we have a micro farming program, urban agriculture program, that we can take all these derelict warehouses and we can put vertical farming, and then have little greenhouses for micro businesses there. And what that does, it creates a number of micro businesses in the inner city, anchored in the inner city. And for every direct job, that will create 3 or 4 indirect jobs in the inner city. And most of these inner city areas, there's food deserts. I mean, there's no, other than a 7-Eleven, they don't have it. So, but if I can create wholesome, food and stuff and jobs on this thing now, and a lot of the policies are just wrong-headed. I mean, you're familiar with HUD Section 8.
Mm.
The HUD Section 8 to me is insane. And, I'm not against the program, but they're using that in Baltimore now. And so what they're doing, HUD Section 8, for the people they're listening, says we're going to take the poverty-stricken people in the depressed areas. We're going to move out in the suburbs, and they're really and the last administration is created like vouchers, like 20 million vouchers or 2 million vouchers. I don't know the exact number of moving these people out. Well, with the net effect in Baltimore, and that's happening now, is that they take all the people that have got some moxie, and some drive, and they're moving them out. And we say, well, don't cancel HUD Section 8, reverse it. I said, the real poor people right now today are the college graduates. I said, if I could take a college graduate in either an historically black college or any kind of thing, depends on your disposition, and move them into the inner cities, especially the digital economy, and underwrite their rent using HUD Section 8. And by the way, there's a number of federal programs that will actually, if you do social programs like the millennials like to do, will forgive their student loan debt. So now I'm bringing, the high skilled, at least intellectual kids in there to work with the inner city kids, which, are digitally savvy as well, to mass produce micro businesses and increase the DNA quotient as opposed to reducing or increase the DNA quotient rather than reducing the DNA quotient.
Well, bringing people back to pay it forward with what they have, it's the right idea as far as making these things work. And there are a lot of opportunities to do things. HUD Section 8, I mean, I've seen people on waiting lists in one of my old jobs. I had people who were in the community who spent upwards of 2 years or more. And a lot of money is thrown at these programs. And there was a sense that I had that people were more interested in saying, we spend X number of dollars to take care of these folks that need something, and it's just not working. We keep throwing good money after bad. We're spending all this money and nothing's changing, so we should stop spending this money. What have you been able to say to these people to maybe have them rethink that philosophy?
Well, like you said, there's a lot of money out there. I mean, there's you got all the kind of the federal program. I mean, for the formerly incarcerated in Arizona, Arizona spends $1 billion a year in incarceration. So there's enough money in programs to try to reduce the recidivism rate. You talk about HUD Section 8, HUD Section 3, all those kind of programs out there. There's a lot of training dollars. So to train the paradigm around from moving people out of the inner city to move the smart people in the inner cities for a social cause to use the programs, makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of philanthropic organizations that are very interested in supporting that. They're not interested in charity. I mean, everybody's donor weary. It's the difference between teaching a guy to fish and fishing. If we can teach them how to fish, a lot of people are very interested in that as long as they got an actionable program. So we're encouraged that, when you start talking about these kind of programs that are kind of wrong-headed, and that, that have been tried time and time and time again and still not producing, why not try something different?
Well, if you want a different experience, you have to do something different. And I think change is slow, particularly on the government level, and it can be on the corporate level. And when you go into different communities, you have some of these large corporations. And do you think that talking about creating micro businesses, because a lot of these larger entities are concerned with being able to get qualified employees, do you think some of them might resist on the theory that if people are qualified, but they're starting their own businesses, that won't help increase my employee pool, and just think maybe this isn't something I should support? Has that been something that surfaced?
Oh, that comes up all the time. And actually, once they get done listening to us, they're really enthusiastic because, as you said, the number one problem that corporations now have is finding qualified people. The reason for the 6 million open jobs are mainly skill based. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we go in and we have a community business, we have a community-based business generator. And so, for example, we go into a community, and let's say take Baltimore, that have, 100,000 people that would kind of like to get a job or go to work or whatever. So to get into our program, we need a letter of recommendation from a sponsor. That sponsor could be a church, a sports coach, a parole officer, a school. And so they say, hey, Hugh Ballou is kind of down and out, but, we're going to recommend it. So he comes into our program, and then what we do is we put him through a battery of aptitude tests. Now, you can go onto our website right now and take a 10-minute test questionnaire, and it'll tell you whether you got the aptitude to small business, and whether that is a consulting business or a franchise business or an independent contractor business, whatever. So we get them through a battery kind of aptitude test, and we give them another recommendation. So now that Joe Schmo or Hugh Ballou, in this case, has got 2 letters of recommendation, one from a sponsor and one from us. And the next thing we do is we self-incorporate them into an S corporation. That doesn't take time at all. And then we give them a skill in weeks or months, or use an existing skill that they have. Now, veterans already have skills that, that are certified, so that's not a big deal. Now that guy who is Hugh with just a GED, now is Hugh Inc. with 2-letter recommendation, a certified skill. And then we take him to the employer and said, okay, now Hugh is we have put him through tests, and we've got doubly recommended, and we think he's going to make a good employee, but don't hire him. Subcontract him because he's got his own company. Give him a 1099. And if you like him, then you hire him. Corporations jump through their hoops on that. Plus, before we go to the corporations, we canvass them saying, okay, what are the open jobs you got coming 2 months from now, 6 months from now? And we'll know that. And by the way, if you want to do the training in our place, then you come in and train and certify the guys, and you pick the ones that you want. So it closes the gap. It's rather than having to stand somebody in line for a job fair, for hours, to connect that, that it is. Okay, so you kind of get the idea.
Yeah, we're approaching our last 12 minutes of this podcast. I want to do some specific pointing toward how the community nonprofits and churches and synagogues can facilitate some of these programs. Like, could they apply for grants and do educational programs? Give us some ideas of how the social benefit community can participate in this.
Our nonprofit social benefit community is our sweet spot. We love working with these guys. Now, when I went into little tiny Durham, South Carolina, Durham, the city council said, well, we got 1,600 nonprofits, and we don't have the money to support it because they're all cutting each other out because it's a pie, and the pie gets smaller and smaller, and and to me, the problem with the nonprofits is they get people all dressed up with no place to go. And I'm not being pejorative here, but if they have training programs, resume programs, reading programs, those kind of programs, it's all about preparation. And what we focus on is it's kind of like in the Bible, James 2, it says, you don't tell somebody that's cold or hungry, be well, and, no, feed them. Give them what they need. What these people need is jobs, okay? If you create the small businesses, these micro businesses, self-incorporating, we create their own little business, we give them a skill, and that is something that the nonprofits can do with us. We don't have to do the training. We can let a nonprofit do it. And plus, we all have this program